It is my great privilege to welcome Vice President Biden, Attorney General Eric Holder, Senator Ben Cardin, and Governor Martin O'Malley to Montgomery County for this important announcement. As we gather to recognize our many accomplishments, we must also recognize that there is still much to do. We have long recognized that no single agency can solve the scourge of domestic violence. Here in Montgomery County, we have spent the last 15 years looking for ways to increase the collaboration between law enforcement and our human services. As we created specialized domestic violence units in agencies and interagency teams, we found the value in these relationships. Many of these collaborations were enhanced with funding from the Office of Violence Against Women, for which we truly, truly thank you. The culmination of these efforts was the opening in 2009 of Montgomery County's Family Justice Center. We have assisted nearly 5,000 clients at the Family Justice Center with services such as safety planning, counseling, assistance with protective orders, criminal investigations, immigration legal services, and attorneys for protective order hearings. We have developed innovative processes such as video conferencing between the courts and the Family Justice Center so that victims won't have to leave the safety and security of the center to get a temporary order of protection. We have an excellent team of people at the Family Justice Center with staff from my office, the Sheriff's Office, John McCarthy, our state's attorney for Montgomery County, Chief Tom Manger, the Police Department, Montgomery County Police Department, the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as our nonprofits, the House of Ruth of Maryland and Catholic Charities Immigration Legal Services. Before I close, I would just like to share some comments that I try to do everywhere I go when I speak about the Family Justice Center that have been shared with us with our clients, from our clients. I felt safe, well-informed, and not alone. I feel comforted and happy every time I leave your office. My daughter is 7, and the staff was wonderful to her. I believe you have helped me with my future. And finally, what took you so long to think of this place? Have we accomplished a lot? Yes, we have. Can we do better? We must, because lives are at stake.
We have made tremendous progress in the fight against domestic violence, and we're very proud that the Vice President Biden will join us today here in Maryland, along with Attorney General Holder, to showcase what we've done in Maryland, but to make it clear that we have to do better, that there are too many people that are being victimized today in all communities, including Maryland, with domestic violence. I want to congratulate the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence for the work that you have done. The programs that have been started here are model programs, and we will hear later today how we are going to build on what's been done in Maryland nationwide, and we should be very proud of the work that we've done in our state. Vice President Biden has been involved in programs against domestic violence since his early days in the United States Senate. In 1994, when the Violence Against Women Act was first authorized, Vice President Biden was in the leadership on that. He understands the importance of the federal programs that help provide the services that are necessary to prevent domestic violence and to help those who have been victimized. He's also a leader on gun safety issues because we know the direct relationship between guns and domestic violence, and that we can do much better. We have federal laws that prohibit offenders from possessing weapons, but without a background check that's effective, too many people have guns who shouldn't have guns. So we need to get background checks in every state in the nation. The states that have background checks, 38% fewer homicides as a result of domestic violence. These laws make sense. And in the United States Senate, as we speak, we are considering legislation to provide a national background check, and we need to get that done for many reasons, including protecting people against domestic violence. We've had almost 20 years under the Violence Against Women Act, and it's made a huge difference. It's provided the legal, civil, economic, and social safeguards for victims of domestic violence. Every time we've reauthorized the program, we have improved it. We did that in 2000 and 2005, and now in 2013, with President Obama signing the Violence Against Women Act. We have improvements. We've included all victims for protection, including students, racial minorities, tribal members, immigrants, and the LGBT community. And we're proud of that. Campus safety provisions that have been added to the bill are extremely important. Rape kit availability. All of that has been improved by the 2013 law. But as been pointed out, we need to do more. The sheriff is absolutely right. We can point with pride with the reductions in the homicide rates that we have seen, but we know that one death is one too many. We need to do a better job.
Thank you all. It is a great and really humbling honor to be here with all of you on this very, very important issue of reducing domestic violence. And I want to thank the sheriff and his men and women here in Montgomery County for their efforts. I know we're also joined by the sheriff of Prince George's County. I also want to thank Ben Cardin for his leadership in the United States Senate. What an outstanding job he does, representing Maryland so very, very well in times when some are saying we need to do less and less when it comes to domestic violence and reducing violence in America. Ben Cardin says we must do more. And I'm just so very proud of his efforts and those of Senator Mikulski on behalf of all of Maryland. And what a great honor it is that the Vice President of the United States should come to Maryland today, isn't it? I am so grateful for the Vice President's presence here today, and also Attorney General Holder, and also for the Vice President's leadership for so many years, as Senator Cardin pointed out, on the important issue of violence against women. There are people in this audience. I look out and I see the faces and the eyes of so many who have done so much and continue to work so hard every day on the front lines, helping victims of domestic violence, pulling together the services, realizing that we're much stronger together than we can ever possibly be in either siloed law enforcement or siloed nonprofits or siloed hospital care. I mean, really what this is all about is about better collaborations, taking better actions together, elevating the intelligence of the systems that we have put in place to protect women and all people against domestic violence, and also to really share information in ways that technology makes possible now that we could never have dreamed of being able to do in such a timely fashion, even as few as 7 or 8 years ago. So this requires partnerships on all fronts. We've driven down domestic violence together in Maryland by 17% since 2006. We've implemented a number of new things. We do not believe that violent crime is something that is driven by the Gulf Stream or barometric pressure. You know, it's not the weather. Together we have the ability to drive violent crime down by doing more of the things that we know work. And that's why, with your help, we passed legislation that empowers our judges to remove guns from the homes of abusive and violent offenders that Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown championed with your support in the Maryland General Assembly. The partner violence screenings, the information sharing initiatives, law enforcement training, the hospital-based victim programs, the lethality assessment programs that our Office of Crime Control and Prevention with President Obama and Vice President Biden's support have now expanded those lethality assessments such that 86% of our population now has their local law enforcement engaged in implementing those lethality assessments. We know where the other 14% is, and they will follow suit soon. So in Maryland, we choose to govern by results. And we know what works, and we know that we need to do more of it. It's not about ideology. It's about sharing information. It's about realizing, as the Talmud says, that if you save just one life, it is as if you have saved the world. And together we can save a lot more lives, sharing information, raising the intelligence of our systems, acting more promptly and more quickly, and most importantly, acting together with the help of a forward-moving federal administration that understands that partnerships is what's required in order to reduce domestic violence. Thank you all so very, very much for the great work that you're doing. Let's keep it up. Thanks.
My name is Jeff Spalding, and I'm Chief of Police in Westminster, Maryland, a community of about 19,000 residents in the beautiful rolling hills of central Maryland. We welcome the opportunity to be part of this program this morning. Our department's been engaged in a lethality assessment program since 2008. We partner in this effort with our local domestic violence program, Family and Children's Services of Central Maryland. Since implementing this program, our officers have been successful in getting 91% of our high-risk domestic violence victims on the phone to speak with a domestic violence advocate immediately while we're still there at the scene and handling the circumstances as we find them. We've had no domestic violence homicides since we began the lethality assessment program, and I believe that this program has played a key role in that success. As a judge in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, Eric Holder saw firsthand the suffering and long-term trauma experienced by women and children who were victims of domestic violence. And as the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, he created the first domestic violence unit in the history of that office. As Attorney General, he furthered his commitment to combat childhood exposure to violence by creating the Department of Justice's Defending Childhood Initiative. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the United States, Attorney General Eric Holder.
Thank you. Well, good morning. And thank you, Chief, for those kind words and for your service as Chief of the Westminster Police Department. It's a privilege to stand with you today and to join Vice President Joe Biden and so many dedicated law enforcement officers, victim service providers, and strong advocates here in Montgomery County. I'd particularly like to thank the Vice President for his leadership over the years in fighting against domestic violence. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of Governor Martin O'Malley, along with Maryland's outstanding Senators Ben Cardin, who we're honored to have here with us today, and Barbara Mikulski, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, who's special in my heart. She's the head of the Budget Committee, and I have to go talk to her sometime next week, I believe. I'd like to also applaud Montgomery County Sheriff Darren Popkin, the Montgomery County Family Justice Center, and the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence for their really long-standing commitment to domestic violence homicide prevention. This morning, I am proud to join Vice President Biden in unveiling the first ever Domestic Violence Homicide Prevention Demonstration Initiative Grant Awards, through which the Justice Department will distribute a total of $2.3 million to 12 cities and counties around the country to support innovative programs dedicated to predicting potentially lethal behavior and stopping the escalation of violence and saving lives. The same week that Congress voted to reauthorize, and it took too long for them to do it, but they finally did it, same week that Congress voted to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, at least 15 women and 4 men were killed by intimate partners. The day the vote took place, the very day that the vote took place, one woman was beaten to death with a baseball bat by her boyfriend. Another was shot by her husband as she left a movie theater. And yet another woman, who was 5 months pregnant, was also murdered by her boyfriend, who drove her body to a wooded area and burned it, all with her 2 children in the car. This is on the same day that VAWA was reauthorized. Now, these are horrible, unspeakable acts, but on average, 3 women are murdered every day in this country by a boyfriend, husband, or ex-husband. Experts estimate that for every victim of domestic violence who is killed, an additional nine nearly lose their lives. And many others, including children, co-workers, neighbors, and police officers are injured or are killed while trying to stop violent acts or simply because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this is why our nation's Department of Justice and our colleagues really across the administration are determined to fight back. In Raleigh, North Carolina, the local United States Attorney's Office recently intervened in a matter where the defendant possessed ammunition in contravention of a state domestic violence restraining order. Now, one of the bullets they found had the victim's name written on the bullet. As a result, we believe that the intervention that happened there may have saved a life. Now, beyond our traditional enforcement efforts by supporting the development and the evaluation of domestic violence homicide prevention models and then adapting these models for different communities, this new initiative will strengthen our ability to reduce these heinous crimes and to help those who are at risk. Now, as we have repeatedly seen, homicide reduction strategies work. 8 years ago, a crisis center in Newburyport, Massachusetts implemented a high-risk case response team. Under this program, each time a high-risk offender is identified, a team of law enforcement, prosecutors, probation officers, and victim advocates search for open warrants. They make arrests, they connect victims with services, and they use pretrial conditions to keep offenders in custody. As a result, in more than 100 cases where the high-risk team provided management between 2005 and 2011, there was not a single domestic violence homicide. Similarly, here in Maryland, the lethality assessment program has enabled law enforcement to identify over 25,000 high-danger victims of domestic violence. Now, more than half of them have spoken on the phone with domestic violence hotline workers. Nearly a third have sought further assistance from domestic violence programs, and not a single one of them has been seriously injured or killed. Thanks to initiatives like this one and the hard work of countless public service and victim advocates, Maryland has witnessed a decrease of more than 1/3 in intimate partner homicides over the past 5 years, at a time when some states are reporting record spikes in domestic violence murders. And this morning's announcement, I believe, provides good reason for confidence in where these and similar efforts will lead us in the critical days and months ahead. So once again, I'd like to thank Vice President Biden for his leadership. I'd like to commend each of today's participants for lending their voices to this extremely important work, and I'd like to congratulate each of our 12 grant recipients. It is now my privilege to introduce Janet Blackburn, a really courageous advocate for victims of domestic violence who has transformed the pain of her own immeasurable loss into a positive force for change. So please join me in welcoming Janet to the podium.
Good morning. I want to share with you my family's story. I can't help but think if the lethality assessment program was in place for my sister, I might not be standing here right now. But the questions weren't asked, the answers weren't given, and the assessment wasn't made. The screening would have revealed that my sister, Gail Pumphrey, was at high risk of being killed by her abuser, her ex-husband. Even after their divorce in 2007, he continued to torment and terrorize her. Gail feared he might kill her. She knew he had a gun. Was her fear justified? That question would be answered on Thanksgiving Day, 2007. Through a court order, Gail would deliver the children to their father that afternoon. The exchange would take place outside the law enforcement center, as requested by Gail and granted by the courts. This is where she felt most safe. However, the day before, he called and offered her 2 extra hours with her children. At the same time, he changed the drop-off location to a park and ride. To have the extra time with her children, Gail agreed to the park and ride, deviating from the safe exchange at the law enforcement center. He used her love for her children to get his way. No one will know what lies he told that day to convince Gail to drive to Unity Park here in Montgomery County. This is where he would carry out the ultimate act of power and control. Around 9:20 p.m., the lifeless bodies of Gail Pumphrey, age 43, and her children, David, age 12, Megan, age 10, and Brandon, age 7, were found. Each was shot multiple times with a .22 caliber rifle. He then took his own life. Just this once, my sister let down her guard. The lethality screening would have validated Gail's fear, and perhaps she would have recognized and acted on those warning signs. Perhaps her high-risk status would have played a part in decisions made by others, and she and the children would have been offered greater protection. Perhaps they could have been saved. And now, a man who has saved many lives with the introduction of the Violence Against Women Act, it is my honor to introduce Vice President Biden.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to you. I'd like to thank you very much. Mariska Hargitay is with me today, and I have to say that with us today. And Mariska, you've been with us a lot, and I've had the great honor and pleasure of getting to know Mariska. You all know her from the television series in which she stars, but I've gotten to know her for her heart and her intellect. This is a woman who has devoted, I don't know how you find the time in your career for what you do, but has devoted a considerable amount of her time and her fortune to dealing with these issues of abuse. And hey, Ben. Hello, Ben Cardin. Thank you for permission to be in your state today. And Governor, is the Governor there? Governor O'Malley? I'm sure you've already been introduced today, but and I understand that the man who prepared me to survive a debate, Chris Van Hollen, it's his district. Is that right? And Chris is trying to figure out how to deal with a budget back in the House, so he's not here today. I want to acknowledge him. But Mariska has become a champion for so many women, whether it's been at the White House Domestic Violence Awareness Month, or at my home in the Violence Against Women Act when we were celebrating its passage, or everything that good that we've done to try to change this scourge on our society. You know, this is the most tragic of all crimes. A man who claims to love a woman, an estranged husband, a boyfriend, an ex-boyfriend, actually in his I don't know how to even describe it, his warped view of his right and role relative to that woman, decides that he has the right to take her life. A lot of people have told us over the years since we began this effort in the violence against women field that, you know, there's certain behaviors, Joe, you can't change. You've heard it, Governor. There's certain things you can't legislate. You can't legislate familiar relationships. You can't legislate certain things, what we used to call crimes of passion. We know they're now crimes of power. But there's not much you can do about that. I've heard that refrain from the first day I picked up a pen to begin to draft, and I know that sounds strange, but I actually did pick up a pen. We usually get a lot of help, but I was determined that we ought to be able to do something about the epidemic. It was an epidemic of violence against women in our society. Some of you heard me say this before, but I was raised by a guy, a gentleman, a strong man, my dad, who thought that the worst sin of all, the cardinal sin of all sins, if a man raises his hand to a woman or a child or anyone with power, physical power, abused their power. That was the single worst sin any human being could commit in his mind. And when we started this effort a long, long time ago, and many of you started before I did, we were constantly met with the refrain that this is a family issue. This is a family issue. It's not the business of government. We actually had, when we were holding those hearings in the beginning, testimony from one psychologist saying, well, you know, there's just something that a woman triggers in a man's brain and he can't be held responsible for that. We're into a culture which we've been trying to fight back, where any time a woman was abused, it somehow was her fault. She shouldn't have walked that way. She shouldn't have looked that way. Why wasn't the dinner on the table? Why wasn't the bed made? Why wasn't it? It was the fault. And the hearings that I held, I was dumbfounded 22 years ago when people would actually testify, and women would testify, I've been abused, and say, I thought I had done something wrong. And establishing the principle that no man has a right to raise his hand to a woman for any reason at all, for any reason at all, other than self-defense. There's never, never, never a justification. No matter what she's wearing or not wearing, no matter where she is, no matter what she said, period. There's no right. When I first uttered that phrase in a hearing, I got some death threats. I was pilloried for suggesting that what an outrageous, actually what I said was, I said if a woman got up out of my hearing and walked across to the Capitol stark naked, she could be arrested for indecent exposure, but no man had a right to do anything to her other than her to be arrested for indecent exposure. And that was the comment that set off a firestorm, that somehow women who are abused, somehow it was what they were wearing, what they said, they didn't show up on time or whatever. And we're constantly told nothing could be done about this. Nothing really could be done about this. It was part of our culture. That's what I was told. That's what a lot of you were told, that nothing could be done. But we all refused to accept that. And I think the collective refusal of all of you in this room and many others has proven critical to tens of thousands of women all across America. People once said we'd never be able to change the way we enforce the law. The sheriff and the chief will tell you that it used to be that there was a reluctance to arrest for any reason other than a sworn complaint. We changed the law so that you could arrest on observing that a crime had been committed. We learned that it was awful hard for a 5'2", 107-pound woman standing before a 6'3", 240-pound guy who just beat the living hell out of her to turn to the police officer and said, yes, he beat me up, knowing he'd be out tomorrow and probably do it again. We changed a lot. We ordered specialized police units that finally changed the way we respond to these calls. Instead of just talking, taking the guy for a walk around the block and tell him to calm down, we learned how we could legally arrest him and put him in jail. And we learned that it was important when you showed up in the scene of a crime to take photographs of the bruises and take photographs, to have photographic evidence, so it didn't just come down to he said, she said when it got to the point where the trial occurred 3 months later and the woman was physically looking okay and healthy. All these things help change the way we deal with this issue. People once said we'd never stop abusive husbands from tracking their wives from state to state, but we changed the law so orders of protection had the enforcement across state lines, and it mattered. People used to say we didn't need a national hotline to combat domestic violence, but we set it up anyway, and now that hotline answers over 2 million calls a year. And imagine the courage it takes for a woman being abused, essentially held in the prison of her own home, to walk over to a corner and pick up a phone and whisper into a phone to someone she doesn't know and not at all sure anything is going to come back her way, fearful her husband will hear it, that I need help. I need help. But it's begun to change. 2 million women last year took that courageous step of picking up a phone. And overall, the rate of domestic violence has dropped by over 60% since we passed the Violence Against Women Act in 1994. And I might add that the murder rate of women is actually down. We've learned a lot over the last 20 years, and what we've learned most is if we look hard enough, we can identify behavioral patterns most likely to result in something like the taking of a life. You know, this is a process of learning. Now that we've delved into it and resolved it, we're going to do something about it. Every day, 3 women die at the hands of a boyfriend or a husband or their ex-husband. 3 women every single solitary day. These aren't statistics. These are our mothers, our sisters, our daughters. These are people who mean the world to their families. And for those families, it means a father who won't hear his daughters laugh, or a mom who will not feel the caress of her daughter running her hand along her face, or a child who reaches out at night with nobody's hand to grasp. You know, we have to do everything in our power, every single thing in our power, to keep these tragedies from recurring. And my message today, and the message you've already heard, is we can do more to prevent these tragedies from happening. We can fundamentally alter that rate of homicide. And Governor O'Malley, that's exactly what you've done here in the state. In a sense, it's both complicated and simple. We've learned that certain behaviors on the part of an abuser portend much more danger than other behaviors. For example, if an abuser has attempted to strangle his victim, if he's threatened to shoot her, if he sexually assaulted her, and there's a number of other signs, about 8 others. These are telltale signs to say, this isn't your garden variety slap across the face, which is totally unacceptable in and of itself. These are the guys. These are the guys. This is the category from which you're most likely to get those folks who will take out a gun the next time and blow their brains out, who will strangle to death the next time. So what we've learned is that when a police officer shows up at a scene or a victim shows up in an emergency room, that's the time to talk to her, right then and there. What we learned from the very beginning is there's a very narrow window for most women to have the courage and the capacity to say exactly what happened to them. And if you don't catch it, then she may be gone. She may be gone right back into the arms of her abusers, thinking again, rationalizing, as happens, that this was an aberration. I can fix this. This can work. And so when we, in fact, began this 25 years ago, that's why we learned that when a woman shows up in an emergency room, that's the time when and by the way, the majority of women showing up in an emergency room with a broken bone or bleeding have a broken bone as a consequence of a man's fist. Now, the intake docs knew that, but they'd say, well, why that black eye? Why that bruise in your face? Well, I ran into a door jam. You know that's not what happened. So what we did, through the Violence Against Women Act, encouraged emergency rooms. We actually set up units to ask them and say, no, it's okay. It's okay to tell me. Because I have a policeman right outside here who will put you in a car, and I have a lawyer I can get you to who will get you a protective order. And we can provide housing for you so you don't have to. If you don't get the woman at that moment, we've learned that it's most likely they'll slide right back into that vulnerable position she was in before. Well, the same thing can be said of what we've learned with regard to those women who ultimately die at the hands of their husband. It's similar. If a police officer or a nurse asks at the right question at the right time, it may save a woman's life down the road. So the grants that we have, that the Attorney General has announced to communities all across the country. We'll give them the tools they need to train local folks to look at predictive behavior so that we do one of two things. You get that woman out of harm's way. You provide her with a vehicle. And many women who have been victimized like this have never fully understood what services are available to her. All you guys out there, think about it, man. When you were kids in the playground and the bully knocked you down to the ground and took your lunch money, remember what your dad said. Just look up and punch him right square in the nose. Hit his nose and he'll bleed and he'll leave. How many of you had the nerve to do it? It was true. You did it. That's what happened. Not a whole lot of guys I grew up with had that nerve. Not a whole lot of and yet we stand back and we say, why wouldn't women, having gone through this, why don't they just stand up and leave or walk out or strike back? It's human nature. But if in fact they know that there's a way out, there's a safe haven, the law can be on their side, that the police will protect them, that there's a possibility of getting a stay-away order. There's even a community up in Massachusetts that goes even further, which I think is a great idea, just editorializing here, that in fact focuses on the abuser, does background checks and determine whether or not there's anything in that person's background they can find to be able to arrest that person. Is there any outstanding warrant for that person? Is there any crime they have committed? Are they being looked for? Whatever it is, I think both should be done, in my humble opinion. But these grants are going to be able to set up programs to make sure that when an officer shows up at a scene of a crime, or a nurse sees a victim of suspicious injuries in emergency rooms, they'll talk to them. They'll ask them specific questions, not just hand them a pamphlet. Ask them specific questions about the nature of the abuse, about the threats that have occurred before, and be able to give them the warning and also give them the option out as to how they can get out of that circumstance. If a woman tells them that her husband tried to strangle her or threatened her with a weapon or other high-risk factors, they can help her get in touch with the domestic violence hotline. They can help them get in touch with the local law enforcement. They can, with the local courts. They can help them get stay-away orders. They can help them get to shelters. They can sit with her while she makes the calls. This is all one woman at a time. It's not like it's something that you can have a cookie cutter for. This is one woman at a time. One of the things I learned early on in this, and I apologize for going into this detail, but it's all granular is the way this works. I remember, as I used to be a public defender in the city of Wilmington, Delaware, or in the state of Delaware when I was, before I was elected to the Senate. And I can remember how one of the things that would happen is in a family court, a woman would walk in and obviously distraught and walk up to an intake officer and say, I want to report that speak up, I can't hear you. That one sentence is enough to have the woman turn around and walk out the door. Because this is such a tough call. Such a tough call for a woman to make at that moment. She's thinking about her kid at home. She's thinking about where will she go. She's thinking about what she'll be able to eat. She's thinking about what clothes will be on her back. And this whole idea here is identify the women who are most at risk and hands-on get her to a better place. Get her to a different place. Let me make it clear. We believe that this will save lives. It already has. And it's our hope, and it's saved lives here in the state of Maryland already. It's saved lives in places where these programs have been set up. Now, one of the things some of our critics will say is, well, it's only basically 12 grants across the country. And, this is not going to be a drop in the bucket. Our hope is, and my belief is, communities will pick this up on their own when they see the success of these programs. I hope that by next year there won't be 12 of these programs, there'll be 25, and by the next there'll be 125, and the following year there'll be 1,000. And you say, well, Joe, why isn't that kind of Pollyannish? Well, we've convinced people that when people see good things, it spreads. Back when we were writing the Violence Against Women law, we made an overwhelming dent. And here's what we did. We went in and had a report, the day in the life of a woman, women in America. And we went to all these states and pointed out the laws that existed that were impediments to women's safety. But after we passed the Violence Against Women Act, we couldn't change those state laws. We didn't have the authority to do that. But in the meantime, since then, 700 laws have been passed in the states, at a state level. 700 laws have been changed. In my little state of Delaware, one of the first ones changed which was astounding. A man, if a woman went out on a date with a man or knew the man that had abused her or raped her, that man could not be held liable, could not be convicted of first-degree rape, only second-degree rape. Now think of that. Think what that said about the cultural norms in this country. That if you went out with me and you knew me, you must have done something. You must somehow be partially responsible for my raping you. If I jumped out of an alley and didn't know you and did the exact same thing to you I did to you on a date, I could be held, the man could be held for first-degree rape. But if I knew you and you willingly went out with me, it had to be second-degree rape. The point I'm making here is, once we showed the way federally, 7 states all across America changed 700 of their existing laws on the books. They toughened their responses to domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and that's the overwhelming reason why the nation has changed. It's not just the Violence Against Women Act. It's changing the culture, the cultural norm of what we're prepared to accept and not accept. So it's our hope that this program becomes a model for every community across America. And the great thing is the governor knows better than I do that governors and mayors, in this case it will be local officials, mayors, county executives, etc. That's a great area of experimentation. Some will come up with programs even better than the ones that exist. And the best model will emerge. And the reason is because of all of you out here. All of you out here who are non-elected officials are basically providers. You're the women and men who see that woman walk through the door. You're the woman or man who is sitting down with and talking to and understands the horror of her circumstance. And we find a better way, no matter where it's found. There's folks like you all across this nation, led by women like Mariska, who are going to see to it that the best model comes to the fore. So all this is meager in the scope of billion-dollar budgets and in the scope of the problem. It is consequential, because I predict to you this will change. But there's another fact, though, that's not very much known. I'll end with this. As you may know, I've been working at the President's request on gun safety since that god-awful tragedy where 20 innocent babies were just brutally murdered up in Sandy Hook. And what most people don't know, they think of mass murders. They think of Sandy Hook and Columbine and Virginia Tech and Aurora and the Sikh Temple, etc. But most of the women who die in a domestic homicide case die as a consequence of a gun. In many of these cases, it's not just the abused woman who loses their life or who is injured. It's innocent bystanders. From 2009 to 2012, 40% of all shootings with 4 or more victims started with the murderer targeting a girlfriend, an ex-wife, or a wife. And there is one number that you should hear. A recent study shows the number of women shot to death by an intimate partner is 38% lower in states that require background checks for handguns. Guns are the surest way to kill someone. They are the weapon of choice. And in those states where you need a background check, there's 35% fewer murders of wives, ex-girlfriends, etc. The issue of domestic violence and reducing gun violence are connected. They both require urgent action. That's why the President and I believe that every person who buys a gun, every person, should have a criminal background check. Because there are some people we know should not own guns, domestic abusers. And by the way, we had this gigantic fight, as some of you remember because you helped me with it, this gigantic fight, the authorization before this last one in the domestic violence law, seeing to it that misdemeanors were included if there were domestic violence misdemeanors. Because again, we know the pattern, and it mattered. It mattered since that has been passed, that's included. That someone who's convicted, even if it's a misdemeanor, of sexual assault or domestic abuse, cannot own a weapon. They shouldn't own a weapon. Remember that fight? A lot of you are nodding your heads. You were all in that up to your ears. But guess what? It works. And in those states where there's universal background checks required, 35% fewer domestic violence murders. But the point is that in those murders that we are focusing on today, the vast 40% of them, it occurs in the office space, at a restaurant, in a place where other people are present. And so 40% of the cases where there are more than 4 people injured with a gun or murdered, they're a consequence of a domestic violence dispute. So convicted criminals or those who are in danger of themselves or others should not have access to a gun. It's common sense. And I want to compliment the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday for voting to expand the background checks. The full Senate will vote on that soon. It's my hope, Ben, I know you, where you are, it's my hope that we can convince our colleagues to, in fact, pass that common sense piece of legislation. And so, folks, we know this violence can be stopped or greatly reduced without impinging on anyone's Second Amendment rights. It has no impact on the right to own or bear arms. It has zero impact, but it can fundamentally alter the physical safety, particularly of women who are the victims of domestic abuse. I truly believe we can achieve this together because progress does happen. As I said, just look at 2 weeks ago when the United States House of Representatives, at long last, passed the Violence Against Women Act. It's kind of disturbing to think that we were still debating it, but it got passed. It got passed, and it's going to make a difference. But look, I've spoken too long. I feel too strongly about this subject, I guess, but the generic point and the specific point I want to make is what the Attorney General announced today will save women's lives. It will save women's lives. We should act on the things we know. And we know those telltale signs of the person most likely to engage in the most violent of abuse. And we can get ahead of it. God only knows how many women may be alive today if we had gotten ahead of it earlier. But there's progress. I'm committed, as the governor is and as the senator is and the attorney general is, to not stop until a woman being abused and a woman being murdered at the hands of someone who allegedly loved her is an overwhelming exception. An overwhelming exception. Not happening 3 times a day in America. It's a blight on our nation's conscience that it does. And there's no more urgent need than to deal with it now. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the police. You guys have been my biggest cooperation. Everybody, you helped write the domestic violence legislation back over 20 years ago. You've enforced it. You do it with with honor and with dignity, and I want to thank you and publicly recognize your efforts, because it's not easy. There's nothing more dangerous for a law enforcement officer than being called to a domestic violence scene in a two-story walk-up, having no idea what he or she is going to meet when that door is opened. So I thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your courage, and God bless you all. As my grandpa would say, with the grace of God and the goodwill of the neighbors and the creek not rising, we can make some real progress here. And Governor, you've already done it. Thank you very much.